Well, Robert, thank you so much for helping with my project. I know we know each other from, gee, you said more than 10 years ago. I'm thinking it's like 13
Yeah.
or would you mind maybe saying a little bit about yourself?
My name is Robert Jones. I worked for 25 years for Hewlett Packard, mostly in IT, although not exclusively. The last 10, 11 years, I've been writing books on history and giving presentations and peddling the books at the presentations. Uh, the lockdown period sucked because nobody wanted to have a speaker, but things are starting to change a little bit now, and I'm kind of back to work. So there you go.
What's your favorite part of history?
Uh, it the books and the presentations. The two biggest ones are the Civil War and the Revolutionary War.
And the I guess what attracts you to those two periods of time?
Well, first off, I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes away from Valley Fords, so I always had that influence. But the story I always tell is when I was 7, my father took me to Gettysburg National Park, and there's the huge Pennsylvania monument there. And he took me inside of it, and the names of all the people from Pennsylvania who served at Gettysburg is on the wall. And he pointed to one. And he said, "That's your great 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 uncle." And I was like hooked like a fish. My life changed. It never changed back after that.
Um, I guess are there any like common misconceptions of either one of those conflicts that you feel um, need to be corrected?
I think there 160,000 black troops fought for the Union, and I, I don't know that the Union would have won the war if they hadn't had those 160,000 black troops. So I'm not sure we hear a whole lot about that. Um, I think it was a foregone conclusion from the beginning that the North just overpowered the South in terms of resources and men, equipment, ammunition, railroad capacity, and I know things started off well for the South, but in time, the advantages of the North just took over, and uh, and suddenly some generals emerged on the northern side that were equal to the generals on the southern side, Grant and Sherman and Thomas and Sheridan. So I I think it would have been almost impossible for the South to win the war, although they probably came close at the beginning of 1863.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My dad's really big into Civil War history, but from the other side. So
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah,
Well, I speak to a lot of Sons of Confederate veterans, so I'm probably familiar with the type.
yeah. I think y'all would have quite an animated discussion. Yeah. Um. So did you know that NASA is planning to put people back on the moon in 2024?
I guess I didn't. Well, I know that from you, from your your post on Facebook. I knew it was coming. I didn't know necessarily that it was 2024.
And I just missed the last time we were on the moon was like 1972. I was born in 1975. Um, I, were were you alive during the time that we were on the moon?
Oh, sure. I was born in 1955, so uh, I was 14, I guess, 14 and a half when we landed on the moon the first time. Up, when Neil Armstrong made the big step, and so yes, I was very aware of that when it occurred.
Oh, what kind of impact did it have on your life?
On my day to day life, probably none, but that feeling that we're not alone and this big white ball up in the sky that people have been looking at for thousands of years, we're sitting on it and we can actually see what Earth looks like from it. I think that shocked a lot of people, and me included. Even as a 14-year-old, it was wow, that's Earth. We can see Earth from especially when the color pictures came out. I think the original pictures, it was some awful black and white 240p awful film, but eventually they came out with the high definition photographs they'd taken, and it was just spectacular seeing that big blue ball of Earth, which is probably fairly unique in the universe. That there's a inhabited planet with that much water on it. I mean, maybe in Alpha Centauri or something, there's another one, but it's possible we're fairly unique. I'm sure you're familiar with the Fermi Paradox. Well, the question's still there today. Where is everybody? If there's all these other people in the universe, where are they? Why aren't we seeing them? So I think Fermi, he had a good question, and I'll go by his credentials.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting though to think about our ability to detect ourselves. Like, I mean, if we were in another solar system
Yep.
and a civilization like ours existed here, like, I mean, if there were two of us in the universe, would we be able to find each other,
Right.
And, uh, I mean, the electromagnetic waves that we send out in terms of like TV broadcast and radio broadcast and what have you, I mean, that's only 100 years ago. Um,
Right.
and before that, we didn't even think about looking for such signals. And as we start looking at sort of reducing the amount of waste in terms of our even electromagnetic pollution, if you will, we become harder and harder to detect. I mean, at some point we'll be using like lasers to send communications to each other. So there might be a point in, another 50, 100 years where we become undetectable again from electromagnetism standpoint.
And when we consider how vast the universe is and the fact that it's probably expanding at a rapid rate, uh, that makes the Fermi paradox more likely in the future, not less likely.
Definitely. Um, so how do you feel about us returning back to the moon?
I think it's about time. I mean, I understand what was it, 72 was the last time. I understand why they ended the program then because it was really, really expensive. And once we done it and planted the flag, we've been here, we beat you, Soviet Union. Once we had accomplished that, there wasn't any immediate reason to be traipsing around the moon. But in terms of now that we have much cheaper ways of getting somebody there, we have the several private companies that have built rockets, and uh, we don't have to spend the kind of money we had to spend for the Saturn V program, I mean, which was enormous. Uh, in terms of mankind's long-term future, it might be kind of nice to get to Mars someday, and I think getting to the moon's a first step, and maybe eventually we get to Mars from the moon. And if we're ever going to get out of our solar system, which I know is probably a long way away, um, but I don't think we should just assume that 1,000 years from now, mankind is just going to be living on the earth, and there may be catastrophic reasons to leave Earth, or just may mean there's a better source of rare earth metals on some other planet, or whatever the reason is. But there could be reasons for us to have to leave this planet at some point. And now I think is the time, because of it's much less expensive than it used to be.
Um, so if you think out like 500 years into the future, which is about the same amount of time as it was since Christopher Columbus made his voyage to now, what do you think humanity looks like, or what would you want it to look like in terms of where it's developed in terms of the solar system? Is humanity still largely on Earth making these little sort of short trips to places, or has it fundamentally expanded out and we have people living on the moon, on asteroids, on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn? I mean, like, where are we?
500 years from now is a long time. I think we'll have people living on Mars. I think we'll be mining on Mars. Uh, I think there's as you mentioned, I think there's a couple moons, Titan, and a couple others, Jupiter and Saturn, that could support life. Uh, and I think we will probably be there. I don't think we'll be out of the solar system yet. Uh, from time to time, you hear about these ideas that, oh, someday we're going to have warp drive and we're going to be able to travel, the speed of light, and well, even traveling the speed of light, to get out of the solar system is a long, long, long way. And I'm not sure we're going to be at that point in 500 years, but uh, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, in terms of making that big jump to another star system, there's sort of like three scenarios that come to my mind. Um, One is, of course, the futuristic technology that you touched upon, the idea of being able to travel is faster than the speed of light.
Right.
But even if you could travel just at our current traditional speeds, it may not be impossible to actually do it. I mean, if you could cause people to hibernate for hundreds of years and then wake up someplace, but there's this, and that's kind of a futuristic technology that may not be possible. But there's another one, this idea of creating a ship that's big enough that people would actually go through multiple generations living in that ship. And, you know, it that first generation is all excited about going to this place. I just wonder about the second and thereafter generation that's wondering if they made a bad choice.
Yeah, the teenagers. How long are we going to be on this ship? When are we going to get somewhere else? I want to have friends back on Earth. And yes, I agree. There could probably be some issues. From a technology standpoint, I think 2 and 3 are possible in 500 years. Uh, I think it'd be possible to put people asleep for long periods of time, although there's some issues with that. Lack of exercise and that kind of thing. What impact does that have on the bones and the muscles and whatnot? And I think if we were going to try to build a ship like that in 500 years, I don't think it's impossible. And I think we would build the ship, from something like this, a much bigger version of the space station. In other words, we would build it in quote outer space, maybe even on the moon. We wouldn't try to build it here and then try to lift it. What would you need? 50 Saturn V engines to get it off the ground? I mean, I'm not even sure that is possible, but I think we could probably build it up in the sky someplace.
Yeah,
So
no, definitely. That makes sense. Being able to build more and stuff. Maybe even manufacture parts of it from the moon, as you said.
right.
That's kind of, um, but yeah, I had a thought, but it kind of slipped my mind. Um, what do you think is the biggest threat to that future? I mean, there's the possibility that humanity destroys itself before ever ending up someplace else. And I was wondering, do you think that's a true possibility? And what do you see as the biggest threat today um, to that happening?
I think well, those are kind of two separate questions, but I think what isn't there a doomsday clock or something, and we're like 1 minute away from midnight. Uh, I think we've fallen back a bit since the time of the Cold War. I mean, you go back to the '62 Cuban Missile Crisis, and I think there's been a couple other moments. I think the world was that far away from nuclear Armageddon. Uh, I'm hoping we're not that far away now. Even and I'm not claiming to be an expert on Iranian or North Korean, atom bomb development. But even if North Korea really does have some atom bombs, well, they're not big enough they could destroy the world with it. And Iran doesn't have them yet. They probably will. What Iran's working on is basically what we were doing at Los Alamos in 1944. I mean, they're small, but China, U.S., Russia, oh boy. I mean, if that ever got out of hand, all three of those nations have a big enough nuclear, not atomic, not a fission architecture, but a nuclear fusion architecture. Yeah, they could. We could destroy the world with that. I'm hoping. I think it's not. Again, it's not as bad as it was during the Cold War, but I think it's. I don't know. Relations with China or Russia don't seem to be all that great at the moment. I don't think anybody's ready to push the button, but uh, yeah, you can imagine the world destroying itself, and there are weapons that I think beyond nuclear weapons that haven't been talked about a whole lot. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the first generation, the rail gun, and there's other technologies like that. Well, consider where the rail gun will be in 100 years or 500 years. I mean, it could be a planet buster. Kinetic energy. I mean, there's a possibility for weapons even more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And to see how dangerous nuclear weapons are, see Chernobyl. I mean, geez. Uh, could you imagine back then? What was it, 86 or whenever it was when Chernobyl, the fourth reactor, blew up, and people in Sweden and were detecting huge amounts of radiation over them, and that was from an accident. Imagine if people were serious. So yes, I think we could destroy ourselves, which would be another reason why we'd want to be able to go to another planet, go to Mars or wherever, so that in 1,000 years we could destroy that too. But I actually don't think that's the biggest threat. If you're asking what's the biggest threat to being able to put man on the moon in 2024, I would say it's probably money, uh, rather than thermonuclear weapons. But long term, uh, yeah, it could be us destroying ourselves.
Yeah, often, um, I think there's a common misconception that people came over to North America because North America was so much better than other places, as in it was like a really wonderful opportunity. But I think it was largely because Europe was so bad,
Well, that's one way to look at it.
right? And so, you like wonder about future space colonists. You don't go to Mars to live a comfortable life. Like there's like pretty much any place on Earth is better than
It's
you know
nicer.
is nicer than Mars will be for a very, very, very long time. But as you mentioned about these threats, that just seem so much out of your control. Um, I can see that motivating people or groups of people to kind of say, I much prefer these amazing or very difficult natural threats rather than having to deal with the threats from my fellow human. And I was wondering if you thought that was a realistic scenario that might play out.
Well, that was part of why people migrated to North America. It was to get uh, away from other people who were religiously persecuting them, or other reasons. So could we eventually go to Mars or Titan, some other place, to get away from people who were uh, persecuting us on Earth? Yeah, I think that could be, and people like that might be the first volunteers. I mean, I don't know that they would have the money to finance the living on Titan, but at some point there'd probably be a call for families and butchers and bakers and candlestick makers uh, to come along to create a society. And yeah, some of that could be people who are oppressed here.
Yeah, I mean, I could see like some religious groups who have lots and lots of funding might be in a situation to.
Scientology.
There you go.
Scientologist on Titan. I see it.
Exactly. You also have sort of like these small Polynesian countries that might have their islands completely overran by the rising sea levels.
Oh yeah, there's another good example.
They might be like, you know, we'll just skip finding another place on Earth. Let's go someplace else where we
Yeah.
can kind of manage ourselves.
Well, there's one of the technologies that may or may not be a pipe dream. I don't know is terraforming, and that it might be possible to terraform something like Mars or Titan to give it a livable, breathable atmosphere. And if you could terraform Mars, for example, we have a pretty good idea what Mars looks like from the different NASA programs. Uh, wouldn't be that different than living in Death Valley or the Mojave.
Hmm.
If they could terraform it, if you could breathe the air, I don't know that that technology is any less likely than being able to travel at the speed of light. So we throw that one up as a 500-year possibility too.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I think the biggest problem with Mars right now is just how little air is on it. I mean, even like the top of the Himalayas is like completely thick compared to even the densest part of the um, Martian atmosphere.
Well, I know there's this theory that they're actually, I don't know if you'd call them ice caps, but areas of huge areas of frozen water on Mars. That if you could release that and the ensuing oxygen, the terraforming would be easier than doing on say the moon, which is a completely dry planet, as far as we know.
Yeah, I mean, and the gravity is considerably uh, stronger. I mean, Mars has an atmosphere unlike the moon that it's hard to imagine. I mean, the atmosphere would need to be made out of some type of like mercury or something to be able to stay uh, attached to the.
Right.
Um, so if it was safe and affordable, would you go into space?
Uh, well, are we talking about for the rest of my life? Or are we talking about, hey, I can take a week and go to the moon and come back? Second one, sure, sign me up. First one, I don't know. I just bought a new house and it has some nice land to it. And I think it's going to be 500 years before we can have a similar plot on Mars. So probably at my age, I would be less likely to want to go. But as far as being a space tourist, or they needed somebody to give lectures on Sherman's invasion of Atlanta uh, up on the moon, then I would consider it. How about you? You're a lot younger than me, so
I would like to say yes. I've talked to more people who have questions about that, and I imagine I don't like roller coasters, so I'm kind of concerned about the takeoff and the landing.
ah
I have been on the Vomit Comet, the zero G flight, so I've experienced
oh.
weightlessness for 30 seconds at a time.
And how
Uh,
did that feel?
Felt fine.
I
I
mean,
like
did you get nauseous or
Not at
anything?
all. In fact, I'm kind of puzzled by people's description of like it's described in a lot of sci-fi books as a feeling of falling, but you don't
Mm.
feel anything. You just have no sense of direction. You just feel like you're light and floating. And I did like flips and what have you. I can send you the video. And
Oh, cool. We'll
yeah,
post it on Facebook if you haven't.
yeah, I'll do that. And you don't even know you're spinning unless you have your eyes open and you're looking at the cabin kind of rotate around you. But I apparently some astronauts really do get a sickness from it, but it must occur after the 30-second mark.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, long term, anything. There's the possibility of there being a serious impact that a short term wouldn't have.
I know. I was just laying in bed the other night. I was kind of woken up by, kind of a little acid reflux, and I sit up, and I'm like thinking, if I was weightless, this would not work, you know, because it would just be floating regardless of how you were. It's like little things like that. I don't think people truly think about. I know I didn't. into kind of that situation.
So I want to ask you a question.
Oh, sure.
Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that basically the U.S. space program now is dependent on private companies? I mean, in the old days, we had Werner von Braun and the U.S. government coughing off lots of money, and it was a very regulated thing. And now we're kind of like back in the Wild West with three or four different companies that, well, try my rocket. No, try my rocket. And there is no Werner von Braun anymore, although maybe what is it, Musk, Elon Musk, maybe is the modern one. Do you have any opinion on whether this should be a government financed and driven thing, or is private enterprise a good thing to have brought into this?
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is private's the only way we make it actually accessible. I mean, one thing about government programs that I've noticed is they like failure is not an option, and also the need to make them 100% successful the first time means that they introduce a lot of cost, and you see lots of processes and bureaucracy and extra checks get added on to it that maybe offer value at different parts in the life cycle, but because they had been there, they always will be there, and your like cost envelope continues to expand.
Go up, up, up.
Up. Yeah, I tend to think the private is a good way to the private public partnership where the sort of like NASA and the government's like setting objectives and paying for winners, and
And
then you
directing the program.
yeah, and making sure you have like those check marks and the quality assurance and what have you. But then you really open it up to a whole bunch of different groups to go and sort of compete for those contracts or those milestones. I think it's a way to allow for the federal government to spend $1, but then essentially have 10 or 20 or $30 of investment across the ecosystem.
So you think overall it's probably a good thing?
Yeah, I personally think it's a fantastic thing. I mean, just like in the computing industry, I mean, if all the computers were just big IBM mainframes that were owned by the government,
Yeah, that would be kind of horrifying.
it would be, but now we have like Apple and Commodore and Atari and, IBM and lots of other little companies coming out. So, well, unfortunately, I have to drop off at the top of the hour, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I think that was the big one. I was curious what you thought of the private enterprise. Uh, in some ways, taking the lead, at least on the hardware side.
I, I
And
would I would say that the motivation of Lockheed and Boeing are very different than say Blue Origin and SpaceX. Like the first two are really optimizing that quarterly revenue, and the last two really want to go someplace.
yeah, that's true. I think the last two are more like the explorers, from the 15th, 16th century. Than, and I'm not putting down Boeing or Lockheed. Uh, I probably have retirements. I probably have stock in them, and I'm living off them. So I'm not putting them down. But I agree with you. I think the excitement is on SpaceX and some of those other companies.
Yeah, and I often think that maybe SpaceX and Blue Origin put enough competitive pressure to keep those other companies around, to kind of make them change. Otherwise, they just become more dinosaurs.
And the bureaucracy of the original NASA program, it probably seems wasteful until you have a tragedy like the Apollo that blew up. I forget which one it was.
Apollo 1.
The one where Grissom was killed, and all those. And after years of investigating what went wrong, it was a stupid electrical relay that overheated, And that was just the kind of thing that NASA was built. So that kind of thing didn't happen. But it does show that having those bureaucratic processes in place might not be a bad idea.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Robert,
Sure.
and I really appreciate you being part of my project.
Okay. Thanks for talking to me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Goodbye.